The more I think about it, 1996 was a landmark year in the history of television animation. We saw the proper start to Cartoon Network's lineage of original animated programming with Dexter's Laboratory, and the end of Nickelodeon's two most surreal and edgy Nicktoons of the time, Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life, the former on MTV. And speaking of them, Mike Judge's immature Beavis and Butthead were about to be followed by the more conservative King of the Hill. This was a shockingly experimental year for Disney television animation compared to the early 90s, with Quack Pack and the Mighty Ducks happening, and Disney's Doug opening up the slice of life floodgates. But that was a show poached from Nickelodeon, who now needed their own down-to-earth relatable cartoon again. Essentially, they needed Hey Arnold. Don't quote me on this, but I've heard through the grapevine that this is a gem. I know a lot of people who have fond memories growing up with it, and it's remained a very popular show, frequently appearing in lists of the all-time greatest cartoons. I have to admit though, that I was too young to get a connection to this show. It's not really that I was more of a recess kid, it's more that I gravitated to the sillier shows when I watched Nickelodeon. Plus, I wasn't there for the peak years. But watching through the show on DVD that my mother graciously bought for me, I feel like I missed out on something special. This is a very unique chapter in the history of the Nicktoons, and I'm very happy to give it a critical look. The creator of Hey Arnold is a man named Craig Bartlett. Yes, the man behind Dinosaur Train and Ready Jet Go. He got his start as a claymation artist in the 1980s. A couple of these shorts revolved around the day-to-day life of a kid called Arnold, who had a football-shaped head brimming with fantasies. Bartlett has admitted that he chose a football shape because it looked funny. After moving his equipment to Nickelodeon in 1990, Craig would book Arnold another gig in the magazine Simpsons Illustrated, this time as a comic strip character. He actually got the job because he married the real-life Lisa, Matt Groening's sister. He brought one of these strips to a Nickelodeon brainstorm meeting in 1993, and everyone in the room knew what their next show would be. Weird, right? I said 1993, pre-production took 3 years. That frankly isn't out of the ordinary for Nick. The Angry Beavers and SpongeBob took 3 years to premiere, The Fairly OddParents and Avatar took 4, and Jimmy Neutron and My Life as a Teenage Robot took 5. Sometimes taking your time and developing your ideas to their fullest potential is allowed and good, as was the case for Hey Arnold. They had plenty of time to expand the world beyond Arnold's perspective and take influence from the bustling urban landscape of the 90s. The public's first look at the show came as a short ahead of the first Nickelodeon movie, Harriet the Spy, on June 10, 1996, though it's from a much earlier point in the pipeline, 94 is most people's guess. The show, Hey Arnold, properly premiered on Nickelodeon on October 7, 1996. Like a lot of other Nicktoons, it wasn't an overnight hit, but it slowly built up momentum across a couple seasons until it was a network headliner. It eventually got popular enough for Nickelodeon to consider making a theatrical movie out of it. Craig Bartlett then went to work on 2 films, a TV movie with a relatively standard plot about saving the neighborhood, and a theatrical movie nicknamed The Jungle Movie, that would be more action-packed and have big revelations. But the TV movie performed so well with test audiences that Nick thought it would be a good idea to put it in theaters. This spontaneous executive decision ended up killing one of their greatest shows. Public interest in the show didn't seem to be big enough to warrant the big screen treatment, even though the fanbase was and always has been very passionate. Production on The Jungle Movie ended up going nowhere, and Craig Bartlett left Nickelodeon in 2004, with the last few episodes scattered through the schedule from 2002 to June 8, 2004. I find there to be a dramatic irony to Arnold as a TV show being born and killed on the silver screen. And when I say killed, I mean of course that not everything left to air was bad, and I'm well aware that The Jungle Movie was eventually put back into production and aired on November 24th, 2017. Hold your horses. I'm gonna go through the show chronologically. What's the show about?
Hey Arnold! What are you looking at?
Funny story about the city most of the show is set in, it's never given a name. Fans have always tried to guess which American city it's based on in particular, but it was always meant to be a generic America town. And in this generic America town is a lower middle class neighborhood that's home to many quirky and interesting kids, including Arnold Shortman, a football-headed 4th grader who's always kind and well-meaning in the face of everyday worries and unusual misadventures. Arnold may be the main character and most stories revolve around him, but it's usually the world around him that acts up or piques interest. You don't always need a proactive protagonist as much as a reactive one, but it allowed him to never hog the spotlight and let everyone else get a piece of the action. Hey Arnold's world might seem small and chill, but it's bursting with character, from the narrow halls of the Sunset Arms boarding house to the oddly colourful interior of the state school PS118. You're gonna find a humble sport making do with what they have. Except for Rhonda, but I'll get to her when I get to her. Arnold himself is a very vanilla character. In fact, that's a reason many viewers don't like him much in the later seasons. Personally, I never felt like he became a blank slate, or that his intelligence transformed into arrogance. After all, he's all about seeing the best in people. If I had one problem with him, it's that he's introduced with a couple childlike quirks in season 1 to balance out that wisdom, but it slowly vanished as he settled into his advisory role. His best friend is Gerald, who's also a chill dude, and the keeper of the tale for all the hood's urban legends. Gerald's great, he bounces off Arnold well, always adds something to the episodes he's in, and his own are rather engaging. His family's a different story, but they build on this character. Ask anyone who the real star of Hey Arnold is, and they'll likely point to Helga Pataki, who appears to be a bossy, cold-hearted bully, but secretly has a rabid crush on Arnold that tears her up inside, the classic tsundere. Her dysfunctional family, consisting of a blowhard dad, alcoholic mother, and atticophobic sister, aren't equipped to help her out either, so even though she is really mean, it's clear why she has a hard time expressing herself. These three may be the most prominent kids, but PS118 is very colourful for a public school. Seriously. Eugene is not only voiced by number 1 and 2 for the longest time, but a great and funny influence. His main shtick is that he has bad luck all of the time, constantly getting into accidents, but always has a glass half full mindset and won't let a wheelchair keep him from being happy. Easily my favourite character in Hey Arnold. It's wonderful to have someone who looks on the bright side. Harold is kind of a stock bully character with an annoying voice at first, but like Helga, becomes more layered over time. He still has an annoying voice. Regardless, I could care about his struggles with his bar mitzvah or losing weight. He's not a bad kid at all, just kinda stubborn. Stinky's a bit more interesting, on account of his southern heritage. He's fine, but that makes him stick out a bit more. But could he shut up about lemon pudding for 2 seconds? Christ! Sid is also something of a quintessential secondary. He's a little more of a troublemaker, but also a scaredy cat. I wonder why they went with those two opposing characteristics. I guess to make him more versatile. Phoebe is a quiet, timid, and intelligent girl, so kind of bizarre that she's Helga's best friend, and the first one she admits to having a crush on Arnold with. Compared to Gerald, I felt like she was much more dependent on Helga for her stories to go anywhere, but that might have been the intention, showing how close they are. Rhonda's a pompous rich kid who sticks out like a sore thumb against all her classmates. She's not one of my favorites, but she's got her place in this narrative, and she is somewhat dynamic. They got some interesting stories out of her. And now, the weird kids. Brainy is a creep who's always listening in on Helga's romantic monologues, and is always punched in the face for knowing too much. It's a weird running gag that they never let go of, but neither Brainy or the gag ever bother me. Last of the kids I want to bring attention to, for now, is Curly, a relatively lonely kid who's obsessive and self-centered to the point of insanity. He's more or less controlled by his poor attitude, which is great when they need some kind of chaotic foil or villain to topple, but is more irritating in the more normal situations. I like him, but like any character ever, it all comes down to the situation. The most immediate adults are Phil and Gertrude, Arnold's senile grandparents. They're about what you'd expect. They're quirky, but smarter than they know. Phil's more of a parental figure, since Arnold's mother and father are explorers that haven't been heard from in years, while Gertrude is much more of a loopy comic relief. Phil easily has a bigger role overall, but they both bounce off each other well. Another resident of Sunset Arms is Ernie, a short guy with a big obsession with action and demolition, who's good and funny. Oscar's a Czechoslovakian immigrant who's a lazy moocher who keeps taking money from his wife Susie and can hardly hold down a job. So how is he remotely likable? The thing is, it's made clear he has a ton of trouble learning from mistakes and taking on adult responsibilities, but doesn't hate any of his boarding mates or want to let them down. There absolutely are times where he's a bit much, but I am able to care about him. Mr. Nguyen is a Vietnamese man who's making do in America pretty well. He's got a very welcoming grin that's hiding one of the best Christmas specials ever. He's the opposite of Oscar in terms of characteristics, but is still a good character all the same. One of the weirder boarding mates is Mr. Smith, an anonymous fellow who's never been seen by anyone else and was only brought up in the first season. I like to imagine Mr. Smith wasn't a human, but just all the animals tricking them into getting them more human food. Arnold also has a pet pig named Abner who's good for pet episodes, but that's about all I can say for Sunset Arms, for now. It may not be much, but it's paradise compared to Helga's home. Her father Bob is the king of a pager empire, and has let the power and money get to his head. He's selfish and inconsiderate, making him a good adversary on occasion, and explaining why Helga can be so mean to Arnold. Her mother Miriam is always tired and confused and is addicted to making smoothies to ease the pain. It doesn't take a genius to figure out she's supposed to look like an alcoholic. And that is very sad, even if she can be funny and rise above her low expectations sometimes. Helga also has an older sister, creatively named Olga, who appears to be a spoiled, successful princess who patronizes her baby sister, but it's quickly apparent that she was overworked by Bob to never fail, and she has a hard time coping with it for her age. This is a very dysfunctional family, and although they're played for laughs, they're just as dramatic. The writers walked a very tight balancing act of keeping this entertaining yet serious, and managed to succeed. That's where I'll leave the cast for now. It's very big, and I just wanted to start with the biggest players, to show what kind of cartoon this is. Not an ordinary one for the late 90s. You'd think with a character lineup as down-to-earth as this, it would have been better off as a live-action series, but you'd be wrong. It was a breath of fresh air seeing a world like this in animation, and it allowed these normal people to be tested in a wide range of situations, be it mundane or kinda wacky. Hey Arnold originally ran for 5 seasons, racking up 100 episodes, being only the second Nicktoon to do so out of 6 currently. So it's a given that it changed quite a lot during its run.
All I have is 70 cents. What'll that get me?
Nothing!
Season 1 of Hey Arnold is an oddball in many ways. The most obvious to a longtime viewer is the animation. It always had a rich urban look and appealing designs, but certain features like Helga's eyebrows, the shape of Arnold's head, and general use of exaggeration would change from episode to episode. They got a hold of themselves towards the end of the run, which is the longest of the whole show. This is the only season to have 26 half-hour episodes, and was spread across TV for 2 years. Some Season 3 episodes aired before Season 1 properly concluded. There's a couple quirks to Arnold's characterization that they eventually ironed out, namely how much he daydreams. I guess this was dropped because it would have been a Nicktoon named after a boy who daydreamed a lot, and it's been done. It makes the remake of the pilot near the end of the season, 24 Hours to Live, stick out all the more. None of this means I dislike Season 1 or that it's my least favorite. A lot of what I like about this show is here and accounted for. It's got an immersive atmosphere with great stories and jokes. This is the season that gave us Pigeon Man and Arnold's Christmas after all. They're still some of the most famous episodes of the show amongst casual audiences. They're certainly among my favorites, as you'll soon see, but Season 1 was held back for me by a few things. Some of the characters aren't very interesting yet. They did a lot of world building for Arnold and Helga's lives, and that's great, but it was clear who was staying and who was being thrown out for sleeker models. One of these is Ruth, an older girl that Arnold has a crush on, much to Helga's annoyance. But after they point out how Arnold doesn't actually find her interesting, she's put way out of focus. His class also had a different teacher in Season 1, Miss Slovak, who was replaced early on in Season 2 for being too generic as a teacher. She was the first member of PS118 faculty introduced after all, before Principal Warts and Mr. Simmons, who were much more distinct and dynamic. Some of the child actors were also going through growing pains. A lot of them stuck around for most of the show, or the entirety of it, and hearing them in Season 1 again is like hearing yourself as a kid. Arnold's voice was replaced regularly though, once every year or two, so he could stay sounding youthful. After Taran Cordell stepped down, it never became enough of a difference for me to notice, so I'd say it was pretty seamless. Taran stuck out though, since I thought he already sounded a bit too old. But maybe that's because I'm used to hearing him as King Bob on Recess, and now as the 5th grade bully Wolfgang on this show. Sorry for this tangent about voice actors, that's something I don't usually go in depth with, but it's just another Season 1 oddity. Also, Phil is voiced by Dan Castellaneta, and he sometimes turns into Krusty.
A swimming contest!
What would you do if you thought you only had a few days to live?
Well, personally, I'd probably stuff my face full of ice cream, skip school, and just go around goofing on people.
Following on from the longest season is the shortest one, with only 14 episodes to its name. That's not a bad thing at all, and it's not a bad selection by any means, but there's less to talk about here than the others, even if it was longer. The animation style got more standardized, as services moved from games animation to Seirom animation. It's a lot cleaner, but I'm happy they didn't tone down the grungy look too much. The two biggest additions to Season 2 were Lila and Mr. Simmons. Lila being a new kid in school who Arnold gets an ever so big crush on, and Helga hates ever so much. She sticks around a little longer than Ruth, and she makes for a much better foil to Helga, being nice but not very interesting. After Miss Slovak leaves teaching to pursue a professional golfing career, Mr. Simmons takes her place, and is a much better fit for the school, always wanting his students to feel safe and be expressive. I doubt public schools had this many teachers back then that were this supportive, so it's very nice to see. Mr. Simmons was a real trailblazer. But that's where my thoughts on Season 2 overall end. It's about as good as Season 1, but I prefer the former's better episodes and moments. It's good to see them put together more pieces that can make the show truly wonderful, and that's where we get to Season 3.
Well, don't mess anything up in this room or the short man will have your head.
Who's the short man?
Oh, he's referring to an imaginary leprechaun.
You know I have a thing for Season 3s, and Hey Arnold is no exception. I wouldn't call it my overall favourite, but it had a very good balance of emotion, humour, and energy. I especially like how they handled the kids this season. They've got a little more depth. Phoebe is starting to stand on her own. They've got a real handle on how to use Harold now. Gerald and Helga's voices are starting to deepen, so this is more how I expect them to sound now. Jamil Walker-Smith and Francesca Marie Smith, no relation, will always be these characters to me. Heck, in the former's case, they liked Jamil so much that they wrote a whole episode to explain why Gerald's voice had changed. And even if you don't know or care about this, the episode stands on its own. That's enough voice actor trivia for now. There's a couple more new characters to enjoy, like Lorenzo, a much more humble new kid who's talk of the town just for having a mobile phone. Such a 1998 plot point. I like him, but he's one of the more minor additions to the cast looking back. Big Patty, a tough-looking but lonely and sensitive girl, took off a lot better, I think. She's a nice showcase of what Hey Arnold characters are like at their best. They challenge expectations just by being more realistic people. They tried giving the background character Iggy a bigger role. I'm not saying they succeeded. There's the stage play director Mr. Likelighter, named after Larry Likelighter, an animator who worked at Nickelodeon on Hey Arnold, and SpongeBob a few times. Knew I'd sneak that show in somehow. And lastly, Arnold's parents, Stella and Miles, are revealed, but at this point are still adventuring in the Amazon. They're kept very mysterious for this season, but that's going to change eventually.
I wanted to thank you for saving me the other night.
All in the line of duty, Monkey Man.
Each season has its own strengths and fans, but I'd say this is my favorite season of the show. I love the stories being told here, they fit the characters so well, and the animation is still improving bit by bit. A few episodes in, they switched from cell animation to digital ink and paint, and it was pretty seamless. It's not very easy to tell they've handed the colors over to a new age. This is also my favorite season for jokes. They were getting pretty tongue-in-cheek around this time. The new character Arnie, this strange, simple-minded Arnold doppelganger, was partially added to make fun of the off-model animation on Arnold they'd sometimes get back from Korea. One addition that's more important than many realize would be Monkey Man, this weirdo roaming the streets and stopping crime in the name of monkeys. I wholeheartedly believe he and his debut episode were made to spoof Pigeon Man. It's a great episode, but Craig Bartlett is bothered by fans taking its ending way too seriously. So here's a much goofier animal-loving social outcast. Let's see you make a Grimtark interpretation out of this. This is what I love about Season 4. It's playing around with what you expect out of the show, but still has those down-to-earth, relatable stories that make you care about the characters. It was a close call between 3 and 4, but I found 4 to be more well-rounded. What does 5 have? A lot more farting, that's for sure. As a matter of fact, a lot of the jokes are more repetitive. I have to say, it's weird going straight from the best of the bunch to the worst. My big problem here is that they're not as willing to push anyone further, they're more content with where they are. The storytelling is getting samey. They do an episode where Phoebe gets injured and recovers quickly, but decides to take advantage of Helga's newfound hospitality. 5 episodes later, Helga gets injured and recovers quickly, but decides to take advantage of Arnold's newfound hospitality. I'm not saying they slipped hard and turned into a bad show, but the first 75% of the season is a little too satisfied with itself. Around Big Bob's crisis is where they flip the switch hard, and push much harder than they ever have. It's like they didn't know it was gonna be their last season until it was too late. The home stretch of Season 5 feels like it was a tumultuous time to work on Hey Arnold. This was when the Neighborhood movie was made, then the big switcheroo happened, so they had to make a few more episodes with the new, bouncier, more detailed art style before going on indefinite hiatus. These last 2 episodes almost feel like the Season 6 we never got, and easily would have put 3 and 4 to shame, but network decisions made going on hard. So hard, it would take 15 years for the show's ultimate cliffhanger to come to a conclusion. Yeah, they continued the story when the Jungle movie got back into production, but that was years later, after most of the executives who cancelled it had retired, and there was a serious push from the fanbase to see it happen. I'm very happy a show as good as this has a community so passionate that they could have a big hand in bringing it back to life for one night only. Before I get into the movies, here's my 15 personal favorite episodes, 3 per season. Hey Harold was easily my favorite episode to focus on Harold, and proof they could use him really well despite his appearance and behavior. It was a good use of Big Patty too, giving her a long-term friend she can bounce off well. This is the start of a pretty underrated dynamic, and I thought I'd give it some attention. Save the Tree may be as cliche of an environmentalist plot as you could get, but it really shows that it's the characters that make it so special. The way Gertrude will have so much fun being a rebel without a cause, the way Big Bob escalates the danger posed to Mighty Pete, the way Helga's torn between her family and friend. It's a good sign for the cast when they can make a Save the Tree story feel more fresh and relevant just by being in it. Mugged is a really good display of what Arnold's like when he loses sight of justice, where he gets mugged in an alleyway, so takes kung fu lessons from Gertrude, but gets so caught up in getting back at the crook that he forgets the crook was just a person and frightens those around him. On top of being an intense story, I love the directing in this one. It really sells how Arnold's thoughts are changing as the story goes on. Good stuff. Friday the 13th is another intense but fun one. Arnold and Gerald test their stances on superstition, and Wolfgang takes advantage and gaslights them into thinking bad luck is real. I'm in love with luck-themed episodes, and seeing the 5th graders get what's coming to them is more satisfying here than ever. Pigeon Man is what most people think of when the best of Hey Arnold comes to mind. You've got this social outcast played by Vincent Schiavelli, who Arnold desperately tries and just barely manages to help. As you can see, I don't consider it the cream of the crop, but I love how deceptively dire this ending is. It makes the positive message all the more impactful. I just find the premise of Helga's love potion creative, and a good use of the character. She vows to give up her feelings for Arnold with a love potion from a Romanian saleswoman, and even though it's textbook placebo effect, the experience gives her intense fantasies and an epiphany that she needs an interest like Arnold to keep her life interesting. And golly does it stay interesting. The Beeper Queen is a very nice limelight episode for Miriam, with her taking over the beeper business while Bob's healing up. It's nice to see her become so confident and successful, and although it's very tragic that the status quo has to kick in, they try to show that it's for the best, that being a lovely mother should come before being a famous one. Parents' Day is a wonderful special that first introduces Arnold's angst surrounding his missing parents, but still gives him the compromise that his grandparents are just as supportive and talented in Parents' Day events. Love the dreams in this one. They didn't have to give context as to why Arnold daydreamed so much in the early material, but they did, and it's beautiful. The original series finale, The Journal, is a sequel to Parents' Day, where Arnold finds an old journal chronicling Stella and Miles' adventures as explorers, Arnold's birth, and their final thoughts before heading off to San Lorenzo, where they've been lost for almost a decade. This special really pushed the limits of what people expected from this show. It's very action-packed and fantastical, and that's the way I like it, and why the cliffhanger stuck with fans for so long. What's Opera Arnold is a very fun, artistic, and musical showcase, putting PS 118 in the world of Carmen. I might not be an opera aficionado, but this was a fun, dramatic retelling of the story, and it's kind of weird how in character everything is. Married is yet another fantasy-based episode, where according to Rhonda's cootie catcher, Arnold and Helga are destined to marry each other. For Helga, this is a wonderful dream future, complete with a job as the president and a secret spy. All that sleuthing in the boarding house would have paid off, I see. But for Arnold, it's a horrible nightmare that oddly ends with Helga almost being forgivable. We get a good look into how Arnold feels about Helga this way, which is very important for the movies. Arnold's Christmas reveals that Mr. Wynn was separated from his young daughter during the fall of Saigon, so Arnold and Gerald try to reunite them, and they just about manage with a little help from Helga. The moral of the story is America sucks, but at least you get a good classic Christmas special out of it. Arnold's Thanksgiving is another one of my favorite holiday specials, and presents how, in the context of Thanksgiving celebrations, Arnold and Helga aren't so different. They both hate the holiday, but learn from Mr. Simmons that it's about making do and trying your hardest to cooperate with your family, no matter how awkward they are. I think that's a very useful lesson for kids that applies to most holidays. Never celebrated Thanksgiving in my life, but this is a fantastic multi-character piece. Now, Helga on the Couch may come 4 seasons into the show, but it makes Helga who she is. She has to go to therapy after another incident and confesses her feelings for Arnold to her therapist, Dr. Bliss. You literally need to see this kid in therapy to know what she thinks of her own life. That's saying something. My all-time favorite episode of Hey Arnold is actually the penultimate, April Fool's Day. There's a prank gone wrong, a school contest, and some amazing animation to boot. Due to the events of the movie, there's more uncertainty in Arnold's dynamic with Helga than ever before, and it's presented perfectly. I think it would stick out more if Season 5 didn't already have 2 faking a long-term injury stories, but this is still as entertaining as Hey Arnold gets for me. But no show's perfect, and here are the episodes I like the least. Starting off simple with Chocolate Turtles, an alright charity episode that's made a little more cringeworthy when Gerald's younger sister Timberly enters the picture. I'm not a fan of her, and I wish I could leave it at that, but there's more Johansson shenanigans further down. Door number 16 is Mr. Smith's one and only spotlight, and it's about everything but him. Everyone in the boarding house wants this package Arnold's getting for him, and that's the episode. It doesn't have a solid conclusion. Best Friends is my least favorite Rhonda episode, and not just because it gives me premonitions. Her chemistry with her friend Nadine just feels flat. I definitely think there are some good Rhonda episodes like Rhonda's Glasses and Polishing Rhonda, but this is not nearly as good of an example. Arnold as Cupid felt like an experiment to see how well they could handle Oscar as a plot-relevant character. It doesn't really work. Again, there are some great Oscar episodes, and this one just feels primitive compared to the later ones. Timberly Loves Arnold is self-explanatory and something of a yawn fest. At least we get a good look at how well Arnold would handle a crush, but Timberly just isn't the right character for this story. She's too young for me to see her in a believable relationship anyway. Gerald vs. Jamie O involves Gerald falling in love with this girl who is actually in love with Jamie O. Let the wacky misunderstandings commence. They just made Gerald way too much of a jerk in this one. Like they're brothers, they should be able to talk this out better. Jamie O is fine, but that's not a good sign sometimes. Number 1 should be the most predictable choice ever, Arnold betrays Iggy. It really is that bad. Not one of the worst cartoon episodes I've ever seen in my life, but it trips over itself every step of the way. It failed to make Iggy someone you could empathize with, it failed to have a coherent message about friends, enemies, and secrets, and the really embarrassing bunny suit walk is just heartless. They managed to make a character so mean that not even Arnold could help him out, within an episode that not even Arnold would enjoy. Now that I've been through every season and highlight of the original series, how do I think the two movies expanded upon them and left it in a better place? The original movie from 2002? Not very well. One day, a big business guy comes around and announces that the entire neighborhood the show's set in is going to soon be bulldozed to make way for a highway. For about 20 minutes, Arnold tries to protect it in his normal manner, with about the same pacing and trajectory as a normal half-hour episode, but then he doesn't succeed. So you know what that means. It's time for a less cartoony version of Spy Kids. The biggest issue you'll have with the movie, if you just want normal Hey Arnold antics, is how tacked on the spy plot is. Arnold and Gerald do their jobs well, and Helga helps them out along the way, but it could give the general public the wrong impression of the show, that it's gimmicky and cliched and tries too hard to keep your attention. And you could never describe the show like that before this. Another problem with the movie is that it just isn't important enough to the show. The only thing that happens here which impacts future Hey Arnold material is Helga finally confessing her love for Arnold, and even then she backtracks at the end. Although Arnold still seems to know she cares about him in some way. More moments and changes like this could have made the film feel bigger, but it's ultimately what you expect when a cartoon of the time gets a movie. I've been through a lot of these, and Hey Arnold the movie sits in the middle of this figurative tier list. That isn't to say there's nothing else great in this movie. While Mr. Shek's a bit of a bland villain, I love this moment where he gets Bronze Age Disney villain eyes. It's so off-model but pretty memorable. On top of that, the art and animation look pretty good for, a TV movie. That's where Hey Arnold the Jungle Movie almost came in, then didn't, then finally did 15 years later. Following on from the cliffhanger in the journal, Arnold has found a map of San Lorenzo that leads to his parents' whereabouts, but a year has passed in their world and no progress has been made. They do have more advanced technology like smartphones now that they're operating under a floating timeline, and guess where that leaves Bob's pager business? I am so happy that Helga's family is even less financially stable than in the classic series. There's a contest at PS118 to go to San Lorenzo, and all of Arnold's friends pitch in to win their school the trip, showing that all of Arnold's kindness and generosity over the years has paid off big time. That's a really good way of linking this all back to what he's done before. The trip to San Lorenzo itself may be way more of an adventure than even the 2002 movie, but it's more on brand. The characters have gone on camping trips before, and there was that time they searched for a pirate treasure in a cave, so all this action and excitement isn't as weird in this context. All the kids and adults get their things to do, a lot of the older voice actors are brought back in bit parts, the references are plentiful. After watching through all 100 episodes, this felt like a very nice tribute to what came before. As you kind of have to expect after so much build-up, Helga and her locket are the most integral part of the journey, eventually saving the people of San Lorenzo and Arnold's parents from an eternal slumber. It was a heart of gold that just works way too well. Maybe if I watched more Indiana Jones, I'd have more of an appreciation for the storytelling and tropes they're aping, but it's a nice little send-off to what many remember as being a nice little cartoon. The animation is kinda weird though. Compared to the other late 2010s Nicktoon revival movies, Static Cling and Into the Florpus, those look like if those shows had remained in production for 2 decades. Whereas the Jungle movie has a different feel from the classic series, a little brighter and smoother, less grungy and more modern. That makes sense, considering the show was originally designed around the diverse hodgepodge of 90s urban life. The Jungle movie did the same thing for the 2010s. I can't really blame them for tweaking certain things, in fact, I recommend it. This football-headed fella has been entertaining and relaxing people for over 30 years, and he isn't gonna stop anytime soon. I find it highly unlikely that this series is gonna make another comeback, and knowing Nickelodeon, they'll do it without Craig Bartlett's involvement and change as much as they can for no reason. Hey Arnold may be distinctly retro, but it is timeless. It's a friendly, diverse, and relatable show that isn't afraid to pull some punches. It's exactly what you want out of a slice-of-life cartoon. I might not have been around for it when it was fresh, but I can always feel the passion of the creative team and the viewers whenever I go back to it. Bartlett might be responsible for this quote regarding how Nickelodeon changed throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And it is unfortunate when a company offers a set of talent incredible opportunities, then reduces their reach so they can make more money. Hey Arnold is very lucky that it remained a good show from start to finish, through thick and thin, and 24 years of varying degrees of logical decision making. I guess it goes to show that being a good person is an idea that never really dies. Hey Arnold, you did good. Goodbye for now.
Hey, where you going?
To take a long, hard look at my life.